the lobby smelled like money. Not the way people joke about it, like leather and cologne and something vaguely European. This was the real thing. Marble floors that had been polished so many times they reflected the chandeliers above like still water. A front desk that stretched the entire length of the east wall, staffed by 3 people in matching charcoal blazers, each one standing at attention, like they were guarding something more important than room keys. Lorraine walked in through the revolving door at 2:14 on a Tuesday afternoon, wearing a beige cardigan, flat shoes, and carrying a canvas tote bag from the farmer's market 2 blocks away. Her hair was pulled back. She had a small red stain near the hem of her cardigan. Strawberry jam. From breakfast, from the morning she'd spent on the floor of her kitchen with her 7-year-old granddaughter, Bea, cutting toast into shapes with a cookie cutter because Bea had decided triangles tasted better than squares, and Lorraine had decided that was worth investigating. She did not look like someone who mattered. That was the first thing Fletcher noticed when she walked in. Fletcher Strand, not the one in the file, a different one entirely, 29 years old, assistant manager of the Alderton Grand Hotel, 3rd-generation hospitality, fond of telling people his grandfather had shaken hands with a senator in this very lobby, was standing near the concierge desk reviewing the afternoon's reservation list when Lorraine came through the door. He saw the canvas tote, the flat shoes, the cardigan with the small stain he couldn't quite identify from across the room, but that registered somewhere in his brain as wrong for this space. He watched her walk toward the front desk. He started walking too. Lorraine was not there for a room. She was there because her daughter, Simone, who lived 3 time zones away and called every Sunday, and had recently gotten engaged to a man named Patrick, who made Lorraine cautiously optimistic, had booked a reservation at Alderton's restaurant 14 for a late lunch, a celebration. Simone had just passed the bar exam on her 2nd attempt after 18 months of the hardest work of her life, and she'd called Lorraine the night before, voice breaking in the good way, and said, "Mom, come meet me tomorrow. Let me take you to lunch, somewhere real." Somewhere real meant 14. 14 was on the 14th floor of the Alderton Grand, glass on 3 sides, views of the city that could make a person forget what they'd been arguing about. It had a 3-month wait list for weekend reservations. On weekdays, if you knew who to call, you could sometimes get a table with 2 weeks' notice. Simone had gotten a table with 4 days' notice. She hadn't told her mother how. Lorraine walked to the front desk and smiled at the young woman behind it. Her name tag said Cora, and said, "Hi, I'm here for a lunch reservation at 14. Lorraine Ashby." Cora began typing. That was when Fletcher arrived. He came around the side of the desk with the particular energy of someone who has already decided the answer to a question before they've asked it. He was not unkind in his face, exactly. He was something more specific than that. He was the kind of person who had organized his sense of fairness around the idea that he could read a room, read a person, and know what belonged and what didn't, and had never once been invited to examine how accurate that reading actually was. "Can I help you?" he said. Not to Cora. To Lorraine. Lorraine looked at him. "I was just speaking with, do you have a reservation?" The word reservation in his mouth had a small but unmistakable weight to it, like he was already skeptical of the answer. "I do," Lorraine said. Cora had found it. She looked up from the screen. "Ashby, party of 2, 2:30 at 14. "Yes, ma'am, your other guest hasn't arrived yet, but she can wait in the lobby," Fletcher said. Cora stopped. Lorraine said, "I'm sorry?" Fletcher clasped his hands in front of him. 14 doesn't seat incomplete parties. It's policy. You're welcome to wait here until your guest arrives." He gestured vaguely at a cluster of armchairs near the window. Lorraine looked at the armchairs. They were fine armchairs. That was not the point. "The reservation is in my name," she said. "I'm not an incomplete party. I'm the party. My daughter is joining me regardless," Fletcher said. "That's our policy." It was not their policy. Cora knew it wasn't their policy. She had been working at the Alderton for 14 months, and she had never once been told to hold a solo diner in the lobby. She had seated single guests at 14:30 minutes before their companions arrived on multiple occasions. She opened her mouth and then closed it again, because Fletcher was her supervisor, and she was still in her probationary period, and she had rent due on the 1st. Lorraine said, "All right." She said it quietly. Without heat, She turned and walked to the armchairs near the window and sat down and set her canvas tote on her lap, and she looked out at the city, and her face was very still. Fletcher watched her for a moment. Then he went back to his reservation list. Simone arrived at 2:22. She came through the revolving door in a charcoal wrap dress, her hair down, her eyes scanning the lobby until they found her mother sitting in the armchairs near the window. She crossed the marble floor in 8 steps. "Mom, why are you sitting out here?" "The manager asked me to wait." Simone looked at her. Lorraine's face was still pleasant. Carefully pleasant, the way a person holds a glass they're worried about dropping. "Why?" He said, "they don't seat incomplete parties." Simone turned and looked at the front desk, at Fletcher, who had his back to them now, reviewing something on a clipboard, at Cora, who was watching them with an expression that was trying very hard to be neutral and not quite managing it. "That's not a real policy," Simone said. "I know. Mom, let's just go up," Lorraine said. She stood and straightened her cardigan. "I don't want to make a scene. Today is a good day. I want to eat something nice with you and hear about Patrick's family and talk about what you're going to do with your life now that you have a law license." Simone looked at her for one more second. Then she nodded. They walked to the elevator together. 14 was everything the reservation implied. The host, a young man named Caden who had been doing this job for 3 years and genuinely loved it, brought them to a table by the south window, the one with the full spread of downtown visible in both directions, the city laid out like a diagram of ambition. He handed them menus and told them their server would be Petra, and asked if they had any dietary restrictions, and smiled like he meant it. Lorraine set her tote under her chair and looked out the window. "It's beautiful," she said. "I know." Simone reached across the table and covered her mother's hand. "You okay?" "I'm fine." Lorraine squeezed her daughter's hand. "Tell me everything, from the beginning. What was the moment you knew you passed?" And Simone told her. She talked about sitting in the parking lot of the testing center, with her phone in her hands, the results email loading, how her eyes had gone to the word pass before her brain had processed any of the surrounding text, how she'd called Patrick first because her hands were shaking too much to call anyone who would cry with her, and then she'd called Lorraine, and Lorraine had cried, and Patrick had apparently also been crying on the other line without telling Simone, which she'd only found out afterward. Lorraine laughed. A real one. Petra came and took their orders. Lorraine got the halibut. Simone got the short rib. They ordered a bottle of something Simone had researched beforehand because she'd wanted to do this right, and when it came, Lorraine held her glass up and said, "To my daughter, who worked for every single thing she has. To you," Simone said, "who made me think it was possible." They drank. It was 2:47 in the afternoon on a Tuesday and everything was fine. Fletcher came up at 3:05. He did not take the elevator. He took the service stairs, which he used when he wanted to move through the hotel without being observed. A habit he'd developed over 3 years in this role, part of what he privately considered his management style, keeping an eye on things. He came through the door at the back of 14, and he stood for a moment and looked across the dining room. He saw them at the south window table. He recognized Lorraine, the cardigan, the canvas tote under her chair. He stood there for a moment with his clipboard. Then he walked over. Petra was just leaving their table when he arrived. He stopped beside Simone's chair, which put him at the head of the table, equidistant between them, but facing Lorraine, and he said, "Excuse me." Lorraine looked up. "I need to speak with you about your table placement." Simone set down her wine glass. "I'm sorry?" "This table," Fletcher said, "is reserved for guests who have been pre-cleared for premier seating. I'm going to need to move you." The table next to them held 2 white men in suits who had been there since 1:30 and had never been asked anything. The table across held a family of 4, also white, who had arrived after Lorraine and Simone and had been seated immediately without escort. Lorraine noticed these things the way a person notices a sound they've been hearing for so long they've stopped expecting it to stop. "Our reservation was confirmed at this table," Simone said. Her voice was even. "There was an error in the booking system." "That's interesting," Simone said, "because the host seated us here 8 minutes ago without mentioning any error." Fletcher looked at her. There was something in his face that shifted. Not embarrassment, not exactly. More like recalculation. He had come up here with a plan, and the plan was encountering friction he hadn't anticipated, and he was deciding in real time how committed to the plan he was. He was, it turned out, very committed. "I'm going to need you to gather your things," he said. The table next to them went quiet. One of the men in suits glanced over. "No," Simone said. Fletcher blinked. "Excuse me?" "No, we're not moving. We have a confirmed reservation at this table. We were seated by your host. We have not violated any policy, and you have not articulated a legitimate reason for this request. So no." Fletcher's jaw tightened. He said, "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to lower your voice." "I'm not raising my voice," Simone said. She wasn't. She had the voice of someone who had spent 3 years practicing for courtrooms. Lorraine, through all of this, had not spoken. She was watching Fletcher with an expression that was unreadable, or perhaps more accurately was readable only as patience, the very long, very practiced kind that comes from having been through versions of this before and having developed a system. She reached into her canvas tote. Fletcher watched her do this. He watched her pull out her phone, an ordinary phone, no case, a small crack in one corner of the screen, and he made a decision. "I'm going to call security," he said. "If you don't gather your things in the next 2 minutes, I'll have you removed from the premises." The table next to them had gone completely silent. Caden, across the room, had stopped walking. Simone looked at her mother. Lorraine was already dialing. Fletcher pulled out his own phone. He was going to call the security desk on the first floor. He was going to have 2 officers come up and escort these women out, and he was going to file an incident report. And it was going to be unpleasant, but it was going to be over. And this was the part where they would realize they had no leverage and would comply. He dialed. He waited. Downstairs, at the security desk, Amos picked up. "This is Fletcher Strand. I need 2 officers at 14. I have a situation with Mr. Strand." The voice on the other end was not Amos. Fletcher stopped. "This is Raymond Alderton." The clipboard slipped in Fletcher's hand. He caught it. Raymond Alderton was not a name that required explanation inside this building. Raymond Alderton was 63 years old and had inherited this hotel from his father and had spent 4 decades turning a single property into a group of 11. And his was on the building, literally, in brass letters above the revolving door that Fletcher had walked through every morning for 3 years without ever once expecting to speak to the man. Mr. Alderton," Fletcher said. His voice had changed completely. "I apologize, I wasn't aware you were." "I know you weren't aware," Raymond said. "Let me tell you what I am aware of. I am aware that one of our most valued guests is sitting at a window table on the 14th floor and has just called my personal number to let me know that a member of my management team has asked her to move twice, once in the lobby and once at her confirmed table, without cause, and has now threatened to have her removed from the building." Fletcher said nothing. There was nothing to say that would help. "The guest's name," Raymond said, "is Lorraine Ashby." Fletcher looked at Lorraine. Lorraine was looking out the window. "Mrs. Ashby," Raymond continued, "is the chair of the Alderton Foundation's advisory board. She has been a guest of this hotel for 11 years. She has personally facilitated 3 major grants to this hotel group through the foundation, and she is also, and I want you to hear this clearly, Fletcher, my wife's closest friend from college, which means I have been hearing about Lorraine Ashby since before you were old enough to work in a hotel." The restaurant had gone very quiet. Petra was standing near the service station, very still. Caden had not moved. Fletcher's mouth was open. Nothing was coming out. "I'm going to ask you," Raymond said, "to hand the phone to Mrs. Ashby." Fletcher walked to Lorraine's table. He held out the phone. His hand was not entirely steady. Lorraine took it. "Raymond," she said. Her voice was warm, like she was picking up a conversation that had been briefly interrupted. "Lorraine, I am so sorry. Are you all right?" "I'm perfectly fine. I'm having lunch with Simone. She passed the bar, That's wonderful. Tell her congratulations from Carol and me." "I will." Lorraine paused. "I don't want a fuss, Raymond. I never want a fuss. You know that." "I know," he said. "But I need you to know that this is being handled." "All right," she said. "Thank you." She handed the phone back to Fletcher. Fletcher held it to his ear. The line was still connected. "Come down to my office," Raymond said. "Now." The call ended. Fletcher stood at the edge of Lorraine's table. The south window was behind her, and the afternoon light was coming through it, and the city was spread out beyond the glass, and he was standing in the middle of a restaurant full of people who had all watched this happen, and he had no clipboard strategy for any of it. "Mr. Strand," Simone said. He looked at her. You can go. He went. He took the service stairs again. Not for strategy this time. He just needed a moment where no one was looking at him. He stood on the landing between 12 and 13 and pressed his back against the wall and stared at the ceiling and breathed. Raymond Alderton's office was on the second floor. Fletcher had been there exactly once, during his original onboarding, when Raymond had stopped in to welcome the new hires and shaken everyone's hand. Fletcher had thought of it as a good omen at the time. He took the stairs the rest of the way down. He knocked on the office door at 3:19. It opened immediately, which told him Raymond had been watching for him. Raymond Alderton was shorter than Fletcher had remembered, or maybe Fletcher was just standing differently now. He was wearing a jacket without a tie, and his expression was not angry, exactly. It was something quieter than anger and more durable. "Come in," Raymond said. "Close the door." Fletcher closed the door. "Sit down." He sat. Raymond sat across from him and looked at him for a moment without speaking, which was somehow worse than anything he might have said. "I want you to tell me," Raymond said, "what your reasoning was." Fletcher had prepared an answer in the stairwell. The answer involved the word policy twice and the phrase protocol for premier seating once, and concluded with an acknowledgement that he could have communicated the situation more effectively. It was the answer of someone who understood that something had gone wrong without being entirely willing to look directly at what that something was. He gave that answer. Raymond listened to all of it. Then he said, "I've been running hotels for 40 years. You know what I've learned?" Fletcher said nothing. "People who do what you did today don't usually do it once." Raymond leaned back. "So I'm going to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. Not for my benefit. For yours." Fletcher waited. "When Mrs. Ashby walked in this afternoon, what did you see?" The question sat in the room. Fletcher looked at the desk, at his hands, at the wall behind Raymond's head, which had a photograph on it, a framed image of a building, the original Alderton property, some small and somewhat battered-looking, nothing like what stood on this block now. He did not answer. "That's what I thought," Raymond said. He stood. "I'm going to ask HR to begin a formal review of this incident. I'll be recommending immediate suspension pending the outcome." He paused. "You are a competent manager in a lot of ways, Fletcher. That's what makes this harder. Competence without the other thing. Without the willingness to ask yourself that question." He shook his head. "It doesn't build the right kind of hotel." He walked to the door and opened it. The conversation, apparently, was over. Fletcher stood. His legs felt strange. "Mr. Alderton," he said. Raymond looked at him. She never told me who she was." Raymond considered this. "No," he said, "she wouldn't. That's not who Lorraine is." He held the door. "But that's exactly the point, isn't it? She shouldn't have to." Upstairs, at the south window table, Petra had brought a small plate of complimentary petit fours that she'd said were from the kitchen, which was partially true. Hayden had stopped by to refill the water and ask if everything was all right with a sincerity that was not trained into him but was simply his. Lorraine ate one of the petit fours. It was very good, lavender and something else she couldn't identify. "You called him," Simone said. "Not accusatory, just observing." "I did. You had his personal number in your phone. I've known Raymond for a long time." Lorraine set the petit four down. "Carol and I were roommates at Howard. She married Raymond when we were 24. I've had his number since before this hotel existed." Simone shook her head slowly. "You sat in those chairs in the lobby. Yes, you could have just." "I know." Lorraine looked at her daughter. "But I wanted to. I wanted to see if he would correct himself. Sometimes people do." She picked up her wine glass. "He didn't. And if he had, then I would have let it go. People make wrong first reads sometimes. They notice something, a bag, a sweater, whatever, and they make a judgment, and then they catch themselves and they fix it." She tilted the glass slightly, watching the wine move. "That's a different person than someone who doubles down at the table when you're sitting there with a confirmed reservation and a bottle of wine." Simone was quiet for a moment. "Does it ever get easier?" she said. "To just sit in those chairs?" Lorraine thought about it, genuinely thought about it, which was the kind of answer Simone had always gotten from her mother and had always trusted more than a quick one. "Not easier," she said finally, "but cleaner. You get cleaner about what you're doing and why. You stop sitting in the chairs because you're not sure you deserve the table. You start sitting in the chairs because you're giving the world a moment to get it right. She set the glass down, and when it doesn't, you know what to do next. Outside the window, the city was bright in mid-afternoon and indifferent in the way that only cities can be, enormous and unpausing, full of lobbies and elevators and marble floors and moments like this one happening in 1,000 different rooms at once. Simone looked at her mother for a long time. Then she raised her glass. "To getting it right," she said. Lorraine raised hers. "Eventually," she said. They drank. The formal review concluded 11 days later. Fletcher Strand was terminated. The hotel issued no public statement. Cora, who had watched the whole thing from behind the front desks and said nothing, requested a meeting with HR the morning after it happened and gave a full account. She was not disciplined. She was, in fact, quietly promoted 4 months later when the senior desk position opened up. Caden noticed it, Petra noticed it, and Raymond Alderton, when he signed off on the promotion, simply noted in the margin that she had good instincts. Lorraine went back to 14 for dinner with Carol and Raymond 2 weeks after the incident. She ordered the halibut again because it had been very good the first time, and she saw no reason to change something that worked. Raymond, over dessert, asked if she wanted to address what had happened in any formal capacity, a statement, a conversation with the team, anything she felt would be useful. Lorraine thought about it. "No," she said. "Are you sure? The people who need to learn something from it," she said, "already have or they won't. A statement from me won't change either category." She folded her napkin. "What I'd like is for you to make sure that every person who works in this building is trained to seat a woman in a beige cardigan at a window table without needing to know who she knows." Raymond said that was fair. Lorraine said she knew it was. Carol reached across the table and squeezed her hand. Lorraine squeezed back. Outside, the city was doing what the city always does, moving, accumulating, building itself taller and then taller again, full of lobbies where someone is always walking in and someone is always deciding, in a split second that feels like nothing, everything about what happens next. That's where this story ends. But I want to ask you something before you go, because if you've made it this far, I think you already know the answer. Do you think Fletcher was the first person to make that call? Or do you think Lorraine had sat in those lobby chairs before? Leave it in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story stayed with you, if it made you feel something, or made you think about a moment in your own life when someone looked right through you, share it. Pass it on. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is make sure the right people hear the right story at the right time. If you're new here, welcome to Velvet Verdict. Subscribe and stay close. There are more stories where this one came from, and not all of them end with dessert, but the best ones end with the truth doing the work.